The wind over the channel carried a cold bite, the kind that clung to steel and bone alike. Dawn's first light crept across the water like a silent scout, brushing the surface with thin strokes of gold that did nothing to disturb the long, brooding shadow that stretched toward France. That shadow belonged to hundreds of ships, an armada unlike anything the world had ever conceived, and nestled among them, beneath a layer of canvas and sea spray, was the man who would take the first step into one of history's most improbable feats, moving 5 million tons of supplies across a hostile coastline in 72 hours. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Captain Elias Mercer steadied himself against the railing of the Liberty ship SS Hartwell, watching the horizon sharpen. He was tall, angular, with a face sculpted by sleepless nights and too many hard choices. The Hartwell shuddered under the weight of her cargo: artillery shells, fuel drums, medical crates, and a disassembled radar mass destined for a forward airstrip that didn't yet exist. Mercer knew the numbers by heart because he had been one of the few men trusted with them. Men selected because they could understand the impossible and still dare to attempt it. Behind him, a mechanic named Rowan swore as he banged his knuckles against a stubborn winch. "Sir," Rowan muttered, sucking on the scraped skin. "French coast looks quiet. Suspiciously quiet." Mercer didn't reply. Quiet was never good. Quiet meant the enemy was watching. A gull swooped low, shrieking. On instinct, Mercer looked to the sky, imagining for a heartbeat the silhouette of a German fighter. Those angular wings he'd seen too many times in too many memories. He had once stood, months earlier, on a captured airfield in North Africa, watching Luftwaffe pilots test a salvaged B-29 turret the Americans had dragged halfway across the desert. The Germans had circled it with expressions Mercer had never forgotten: fascination, calculation, and something else, something like respect, laced with dread. After firing the weapon themselves and witnessing its precision, one of them had murmured under his breath, "We would never have built it this well." Mercer had understood then what superiors had long hinted: the war would not be won by numbers alone, but by the speed with which technology and resolve could be adapted, refined, reinvented. Now, standing on a heaving deck while dawn bled into full daylight, he felt the same weight. The success of this operation, the most audacious supply surge in recorded history, depended on an orchestration of technology, logistics, courage, and a stubborn refusal to yield. A radio burst crackled from the wheelhouse. 2 short clicks, 1 long, the prearranged signal. Rowan turned. "It's starting." "It's begun," Mercer corrected quietly. "Oh!" The coast of Normandy emerged like a broken scar. Concrete bunkers, twisted metal from previous bombardments, and the remnants of a once quiet countryside now reshaped by war. But something was different today. As the Hartwell approached the landing sector, Mercer saw men running, not in retreat, but in urgent preparation: engineers, beachmasters, logistics officers with clipboards clamped under their arms and expressions sharpened to a blade's edge. "Look at that," Rowan breathed, "like someone built a port overnight." Someone had. Or rather, hundreds of someones. Floating piers stretched from the surf like colossal metal fingers. Artificial breakwaters constructed from scuttled ships formed a tranquil lagoon where the sea had once been merciless. Massive prefabricated roadways bobbed gently, waiting to receive vehicle after vehicle. It was Mulberry Harbour, one of the most secret and daring engineering projects of the war. To the German High Command, who still believed the Atlantic Wall was impenetrable, its existence would be unthinkable. But they would not merely think it today, they would witness it, and they would fear it. As Hartwell slid into position, cranes unfolded like the limbs of some metallic leviathan. Dozens of landing craft darted between vessels, ferrying cargo and personnel in a frenzy of controlled chaos. Mercer felt the familiar adrenaline burn in his chest. This was the crucible. This was where victory bent from theory into reality. A young naval officer jogged across the deck toward him. "Captain Mercer." "Sir, you're needed at the shore command post." "Priority order." Mercer nodded, securing his duffel and stepping onto the waiting LCVP. As the craft lurched forward, seawater splashed his boots, mixing the scent of diesel with the brine. The engines roared, but louder still was the rhythmic pounding of artillery from further inland. The front line was pushing, clawing, demanding every ounce of support the supply chain could muster. "Hold on!" the coxswain yelled as they neared the pier. The craft scraped against the bobbing platform. Mercer vaulted out. Already he could feel the ground hum beneath him, the vibration of trucks, cranes, and countless boots hammering a single unified purpose into the sand. The command post was little more than a cluster of tents supported by half-buried steel beams. Inside, maps covered every surface, and officers spoke in clipped bursts. "Mercer," a colonel waved him over, "we've got a situation." There was always a situation. The colonel pointed to a map pinned with colored tags. "Enemy aircraft executed a reconnaissance sweep an hour ago. We shot down 2, but 1 got through. They've seen the harbor. Expect a response." Mercer exhaled slowly. "Bombers. Or E-boats. Or both. We're accelerating offload. You're coordinating the eastern logistics corridor." Mercer pulled on headphones, leaning over the radio table. Voices thundered through the system. "Fuel truck bogged down. Bridge 3 unstable. Medical convoy delayed. Incoming fire near Sector Red." He snapped into the rhythm instantly. "Redirect the convoy through the secondary causeway. Move the engineers to reinforce Bridge 3. Divert the fuel trucks to Sector Green and clear the road near the red sector. I don't care how." Orders rippled outward like shockwaves. Mercer knew the game. Every 10 minutes saved equaled dozens of lives preserved, miles gained, and the enemy's window for counterattack rapidly shrinking. Outside the tent, a shrill whistle cut through the air. Soldiers scrambled as a formation of British tank transporters clattered onto the pier, carrying Cromwells draped in camouflage netting. Their engines growled, eager for battle. Above them, the sky darkened, thin shadows darting overhead. Mercer's pulse quickened before he even saw them. German aircraft. Not many. 8, maybe 9. But enough to cause havoc. The anti-air batteries barked immediately, black blossoms of flak erupting around the enemy formation. The Luftwaffe planes veered, diving toward the harbor's heart. Mercer sprinted outside, yelling for everyone to take cover. The first bomb fell wide, exploding harmlessly in the surf, but the second struck a pier leg, sending debris skyward in a geyser of splinters and flame. Men ducked, trucks screeched to a halt, and cranes froze mid-lift. Then the sky tore open. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So, if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A new sound thundered above them, deeper, heavier, unmistakable. American P-47 Thunderbolts dove from the clouds like silver hawks, guns blazing. The roar shook the sand. One German fighter spiraled into the sea, another limped west trailing smoke. The remaining planes scattered. Mercer felt the collective exhale of hundreds of men. Air superiority wasn't permanent, but for the moment it was theirs. By late afternoon, the harbor was operating at a pace that defied belief. Entire rows of trucks snaked inland. Ammunition depots appeared, where mere hours earlier there had been only dunes. Fuel hoses stretched like arteries, pumping lifeblood into the war machine, pushing toward St. Lo. But Mercer knew something the others did not. The enemy response wouldn't come from the sky alone. He had seen German ingenuity. He had watched them dissect that captured B-29 turret with almost predatory fascination. He had heard rumors, unconfirmed but persistent, that the Kriegsmarine had deployed new wolf packs near the Channel's western approaches, submarines outfitted with improved radar warning systems, submarines that could ambush supply lines, just as a single American submarine once sank 8 destroyers in 11 days using a revolutionary detection array. The Germans had always been quick to imitate innovation once they recognized its value. As the sun dipped low, Mercer took a moment to inhale the salt-tinged air. Men bustled around him, some shouting orders, others slumping from exhaustion, others eating cold rations while leaning against crates marked high explosive. The scale of it all was staggering. and yet they were only 18 hours into the 72-hour timetable. "Sir," Rowan emerged from behind a stack of fuel drums, breathless. "Message from offshore patrol. They spotted something. Fast-moving, low profile, probably E-boats." Mercer's jaw tightened. "How many?" "Estimate 3, maybe 4. E-boats, the German fast attack craft, were sharks in these waters, lethal and swift. If they breached the perimeter, they could shred the supply convoy." Mercer grabbed his binoculars and bolted toward the nearest observation tower. Climbing the metal rungs 2 at a time, he reached the top and scanned the fading horizon. For a moment he saw nothing. Then, there, thin wakes slicing the water far beyond the breakwater. "They're testing the defense screen," Mercer muttered. "And if they find a hole, we plug it before they widen it." And then a field phone rang below. Moments later, a beachmaster shouted up, "Captain, command wants you back at the ops tent. Priority." Mercer descended the tower, boots clanging harshly. Inside the tent, the colonel looked grim. "Convoy Delta just transmitted a distress flare. They're reporting radar anomalies, something big out there, bigger than E-boats." Mercer's mind raced. A U-boat, a new variant. The British had suspected the Germans were testing enhanced submarine radar detectors, systems that could detect Allied radar emissions before being spotted themselves. If one of those submarines reached the supply corridor, the damage could be catastrophic. He spoke quietly. "We need to reroute the convoys immediately and reinforce the escort net." "Already in motion," the colonel said. "But we need you to go offshore." "Me?" Mercer blinked. "In what capacity?" "As liaison to the Naval Task Group. They need someone who understands both the logistics chain and enemy tech patterns, someone who's seen how the Germans adapt." The colonel paused. "Someone who can make the hard calls." Mercer felt the old weight settle across his shoulders. He had joined the logistics corps because he thought he could leave the front lines behind, but the war had a way of dragging every capable man back into its teeth. Rowan appeared again, already carrying Mercer's gear. "Sir, boat's waiting." The LCVP cut across the water, weaving between cargo ships and escort vessels. As night tightened around them, the armada transformed into a forest of glowing lights, each a tiny beacon of determination in the suffocating dark. They reached the destroyer, USS Harlow, a sleek grey predator that loomed above them. Mercer climbed the ladder onto the deck where Captain Adele Ramsey waited. She was sharp-eyed, composed, and carried a reputation for decisiveness carved from 2 years of Atlantic combat. "Captain Mercer," she greeted. "We've been monitoring the radar anomalies. Whatever's out there, it's smart." "Smart how?" Mercer asked. It's staying just outside conventional detection range. Only shows a trace when it wants to. Almost like—" She hesitated. "Like it can see us first," Mercer finished. Ramsey nodded. "Exactly." Mercer's thoughts spiraled back to that desert airfield months ago, the way the German officers had spoken, the hints that their engineers were racing to close the technological gap. "How long before it reaches the corridor?" he asked. "Could be minutes, could be hours. Hard to say." A shout erupted from the radar station. "Contact, bearing 210, moving fast." Mercer and Ramsey rushed inside. The radar screen pulsed, a faint blip, there for a heartbeat before vanishing. Then another, closer. Ramsey snapped orders. "All hands to battle stations! Deploy sonar teams!" The destroyer surged forward. Out on the black water, the crew strained their eyes. The ocean was calm. Too calm. A sonar ping echoed through the hull. Sharp, metallic. "Contact." Ramsey gripped the railing. "Depth charges, pattern Bravo." Explosions rippled beneath the waves, sending plumes of water skyward. The deck trembled under Mercer's boots, but the U-boat didn't surface. Another sonar hit. Closer. "Damn it," Ramsey muttered. It's slipping under us." Mercer stared into the dark ocean. "It's not trying to escape." Ramsey turned to him. "What then?" "It's testing us," Mercer said, "mapping our response." "Why?" "It's just one submarine." Mercer met her gaze. "Unless it isn't." Silence fell. Ramsey issued a new order, one Mercer knew she hated giving. Signal the fleet, all escort vessels to high alert formation. Prepare for potential multi-contact engagement. Mercer inhaled the cold night air. The sea stretched before them like a vast, waiting abyss. The Germans had seen the harbor. They'd seen the impossible unfolding on the French coast, the 5-million-ton miracle that defied every expectation. And they would not let it continue unchallenged. Somewhere in that blackness, steel and intent were converging. Mercer tightened his grip on the railing as the destroyer surged into the darkness, hunting shadows that hunted them in return. The 72 hours had only just begun. The sea seemed alive, whispering with menace as the destroyer cut through the inky black. Mercer's boots clanged against the deck with every step, though his mind was 1,000 miles ahead, on the fragile arteries of the supply chain, snaking through Normandy. Every truck, every crate, every man ashore depended on their ability to hold the corridor. And now, an unseen predator was testing their nerve and their skill. Contact bearing. 215, a sonar operator shouted, voice tight with tension. The blip pulsed briefly before vanishing again. Mercer felt a cold knot of fear in his gut. The Germans had learned, adapted, evolved, just as he had feared. And this submarine wasn't merely hunting them, it was studying them, probing for weakness. Ramsey's fingers danced over the console. Deploy the secondary sonar, boys. Spread pattern Delta. Keep it tight. Don't give it room to maneuver. Mercer nodded, his eyes never leaving the horizon. He imagined the U-boat beneath them, sleek, silent, and patient. Months ago, an American submarine had decimated 8 Japanese destroyers in 11 days using a single clever adaptation of radar. If the Germans had copied even a fraction of that ingenuity, they could cripple this entire operation in hours. The first explosion tore through the water. A plume of sea spray rose like a geyser, shining in the moonlight. The destroyer shuddered. Men grunted as metal groaned beneath their feet. Mercer clenched the railing, teeth gritted against the shockwave. Nothing. Ramsey's voice was tight. No hits. A tense silence followed. Then another sonar ping. Closer this time. The crew stiffened, each man listening, calculating, praying. Mercer's mind raced. He knew the Germans would strike not with brute force, but with precision. Exactly the way that captured turret in North Africa had unnerved Luftwaffe pilots. They were patient, and patience was deadly. Captain, a radio operator called, Convoy Bravo reports near-miss torpedo wake 30 miles east. Mercer's stomach sank. The submarine had found the supply line. It was testing every response, probing every defensive weak point. How fast can they move? He asked. Impossible to say, the operator admitted. They've disappeared from sonar. Mercer looked out over the water. The night was calm, too calm. The U-boat could be anywhere, hiding in the folds of shadow, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He remembered reading about a similar engagement months earlier. The B-29 turret tests. Those German officers had stared at the weapon, afraid but fascinated. This submarine was doing the same, calculating, waiting. Captain Ramsey, Mercer said, voice low, urgent. We need to anticipate multiple contacts. They're not alone. They're testing us for a strike group. Ramsey's eyes narrowed. Understood. Prepare the anti-subnets. Alert all destroyers in range. Hours passed like frozen waves. The destroyer hunted, sonar pings slicing through the night like sharp knives. Occasionally, a distant explosion. Depth charges detonating, shook the water, and sent a thrill of dread through the crew. Mercer leaned against the console, mind elsewhere, on the men landing supplies under artillery fire, on trucks bogged down in sand, on engineers who had been working for hours with no rest. Every minute they stalled, the enemy could exploit it. Then came a flash, a sudden flare of light on the horizon, followed by the deep, guttural roar of a torpedo hitting water. Mercer turned sharply. Where? Bearing 200. Approaching convoy, Charlie, the operator yelled. Ramsay barked orders. All hands! Battle stations! Deploy all countermeasures, evasive maneuvers! The destroyer veered sharply, cutting through the water as if slicing a knife. Depth charges detonated in calculated sequences, each explosion rocking the hull. Mercer's ears rang. The floor beneath him trembled. He gritted his teeth and focused, counting every pulse, every blip on the sonar. It was a deadly dance. One misstep could mean catastrophe. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The U-boat struck with precision, but the destroyer and its escorts were equally prepared. Finally, a faint blip appeared, stationary, and then another explosion. This time, followed by silence. The U-boat had been forced to retreat, but Mercer knew better than to celebrate. There would be more. There always were. By dawn, the first trucks rumbled through the reinforced corridors, carrying supplies inland. Men who'd been on edge for hours now moved with exhausted determination, unloading ammunition, food and fuel. Mercer watched from a vantage point, chest heaving with relief and anxiety. He could see the tide of war slowly tipping toward them, but it was fragile, dependent on every decision, every maneuver. He remembered the engineers on the floating piers, sweating as they reinforced structures, their hands raw from metal and rope. He remembered the pilots who had swept the skies and the soldiers racing along the beaches under the threat of sniper fire. All of them were threads woven into the larger tapestry of victory or annihilation, and in the shadows of the channel, the German submarine threat remained patient, adaptive, and intelligent. Mercer descended to the command post, where the colonel was already coordinating further reinforcements. Maps, littered with coloured pins and chalk lines, illustrated the progress of the massive operation. The colonel looked up as Mercer approached. "Captain," he said, voice tight, "you've seen them firsthand. What's your assessment?" Mercer studied the map, tracing the convoy routes with his finger. "They're testing our limits. They're watching, learning, probing. But we've adapted. We can stay one step ahead if we continue to anticipate, not react." The colonel nodded slowly. "Agreed. But the men need morale. They need to know this isn't just chaos." Mercer swallowed. "Then they need to see the results. They need to see the supplies moving, the harbour working, the victory we're carving, minute by minute." Outside, the first light of morning painted the harbour gold, glinting off metal cranes and the smooth surfaces of freshly landed tanks. It was a fragile beauty, born of sweat, blood, and determination. Mercer allowed himself a brief moment to appreciate it before the radio crackled again. Another report of submarine activity near Convoy Delta. The war was relentless. There would be no reprieve. Mercer moved swiftly, issuing orders to reinforce anti-submarine measures along the eastern corridor. He coordinated with Ramsay and the other naval captains, ensuring that every convoy had escort coverage, every route was monitored, and every potential gap addressed. It was a complex dance, requiring both strategy and improvisation. One mistake could unravel everything. By midday, the harbour was a hive of activity. Trucks snaked inland, carrying munitions, medical supplies, and rations. Tanks rumbled into position, their engines growling like caged beasts. Engineers continued to repair and extend the floating roadways, their faces streaked with sweat and grime. Soldiers, fresh from combat, took the supplies and moved them into forward positions, reinforcing the push towards St. Lo. Mercer walked among them briefly, offering words of encouragement, assessing bottlenecks, and watching the extraordinary human effort in motion. Every man, every machine, every calculation was a testament to the audacity of the operation. The impossible was becoming reality. And yet, the shadow of the German submarine threat remained, a constant reminder that victory was never guaranteed. Mercer had witnessed the destructive capability of a single U-boat months earlier, 8 destroyers sunk in 11 days, and he knew the Germans were learning, adapting, and ready to strike with deadly precision. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mercer returned to the destroyer Harlow to check on anti-submarine patrols. Ramsay met him at the gangway. "Another quiet night for now. she said, eyes scanning the horizon. Mercer nodded. Too quiet. They're learning, waiting for the perfect moment. Ramsay grimaced. We'll be ready. I trust your instincts. Mercer appreciated the confidence, but knew better than to rely solely on instincts. He had learned that the war favored preparation, adaptation, and the ability to anticipate the enemy's next move. Late at night, as the destroyer patrolled the channel, Mercer stood at the bow, staring into the blackness. The stars reflected off the calm sea, a deceptive serenity. Somewhere below, the Germans plotted, calculating, and waiting. Their patience was as lethal as any torpedo, their cunning honed by months of failure and observation. Mercer felt a shiver run down his spine, not from fear, but from the immense weight of responsibility. The lives on shore, the success of the supply operation, the fragile momentum of the invasion, all depended on decisions made in the darkness, often with only fragments of information. Suddenly, the sonar operator shouted, "Contact, bearing 185, moving fast." Mercer and Ramsay sprang into action. Depth charges were readied, evasive maneuvers executed, and radio calls transmitted to nearby destroyers. The tension was palpable, every heartbeat synchronized with the pulses of sonar, every movement critical. The U-boat engaged in a deadly game of cat and mouse. It tested their formations, probed for weaknesses, and vanished into the depths, only to reappear in unexpected locations. Mercer's mind raced, recalling the ingenuity of the B-29 turret tests and the lessons learned from previous engagements. He understood that this enemy thrived on unpredictability, adapting quickly to every tactic deployed against them. Hours passed in a blur of adrenaline and calculated responses. Depth charges detonated with thunderous force, sonar pings echoed across the water, and the destroyer and its crew danced a perilous ballet with an unseen adversary. Mercer felt exhaustion gnawing at him, but there was no time to rest. The supply lines, the harbor, and the men ashore depended on their vigilance. By dawn, the immediate threat had been pushed back, but Mercer knew it was only temporary. The Germans were patient, adaptive, and relentless. The 72-hour operation had already proven the impossible could be achieved, but the battle was far from over. Mercer returned to the shore command post, greeted by the sight of a harbor operating at full capacity. The 5 million tons of supplies were flowing inland, tanks and trucks moving with unprecedented efficiency. Engineers reinforced the piers, soldiers carried ammunition and rations forward, and the tide of war in Normandy was beginning to turn. But Mercer's eyes remained vigilant, scanning for signs of renewed submarine activity or enemy counterattacks. As he walked among the men, he offered quiet words of encouragement, recognizing their extraordinary effort and the critical role they played in shaping history. Each man, each machine, and each calculation was a thread in the intricate tapestry of victory. That night, Mercer returned to the destroyer Harlow for a final patrol. The sea was calm, the stars reflecting off the water, but he knew the enemy remained beneath the surface, calculating, waiting, and ready to strike. The U-boat threat was constant, a reminder that victory in this war was never guaranteed and that the margin between triumph and disaster was razor-thin. Mercer stood at the bow, watching the horizon, feeling the weight of responsibility settle upon him. The 72-hour operation had tested the limits of human ingenuity, courage, and endurance. It had demanded every ounce of skill, every decision made with precision, and every heart willing to face the uncertainty of war. And while the immediate danger had passed, he knew the battle for Normandy, and the war itself, was far from over. He took a deep breath, the cold wind cutting through him, and steeled himself for the hours ahead. The Germans would strike again, and when they did, every ounce of preparation, every lesson learned, and every bit of courage would be put to the test once more. But for now, the harbor thrummed with life. The impossible had been achieved. 5 million tons of supplies had crossed the channel in 72 hours. And as Mercer watched the lights of the harbor glimmer against the darkness, he allowed himself a fleeting moment of pride, a recognition that in the midst of chaos and danger, human determination could bend history itself. The U-boat threat lingered, but so did hope, resilience, and the unyielding spirit of those who refused to surrender to fear. Mercer knew that as long as men like these stood their ground, the war could be won. Not with sheer numbers alone, but with courage, ingenuity, and the relentless drive to shape the future against all odds. The 72-hour operation was only the beginning. The war, as always, would continue to test them, to challenge them, and to demand everything they could give. And Captain Elias Mercer, standing on the deck of the Harlow, knew that they would face it together, united, unbroken, and determined to see history bend in their favor. The morning fog hung low over the channel, thick as wool, wrapping the destroyer Harlow in a blanket of uncertainty. Mercer stood on the bridge, binoculars pressed to his eyes, scanning the faint outlines of convoys moving toward the beaches. The harbor had been a triumph, but the Germans were far from defeated. The previous night's sonar readings had confirmed his suspicions. They were facing not one U-boat, but a small wolf pack, coordinating attacks with unnerving precision. "Captain," Ramsey said, pointing to the plotting table, "Convoy Delta reports torpedo wakes 40 miles southeast. They're shadowing every movement." Mercer's jaw tightened. Every convoy, every truck, every man on the beach depended on their ability to anticipate these predators. "Get me continuous sonar sweeps on all channels. I want every blip monitored. They won't sneak up on us again." The destroyer's engines hummed a tense rhythm as the crew executed a series of complex maneuvers designed to lure the U-boats into traps. Depth charges were readied, but Mercer knew these hunts were more than just brute force. Like the pilots who had tested captured B-29 turrets months earlier, the enemy learned quickly. They adapted. Each attack required foresight, strategy, and nerves of steel. Below deck, engineers and sonar operators worked in near silence, eyes glued to the screens. Every ping, every shadow, could be a life-or-death decision. Mercer descended to the command post to confer with them directly. "We're seeing 3 possible contacts," said the sonar chief, voice taut, "all moving in a loose formation. One's fast, 2 are keeping distance. They're coordinating." Mercer leaned over the console, tracing their projected path with a gloved hand. "They've studied our routes. They're testing the gaps, but we're not giving them any. I want counter patterns. Delta and Sigma deployed simultaneously. Make them think we're fractured." Ramsey looked at him sharply. "You think we can outsmart them?" Mercer's eyes were hard as flint. "We have to. Lives ashore depend on it. Every man carrying supplies, every truck delivering fuel. If they succeed, the entire operation is jeopardized." The day unfolded like a fevered dream. Explosions echoed from depth charges, sonar pings became frantic alarms, and the destroyer Harlow danced across the waves with the precision of a predator of its own. Mercer coordinated with nearby vessels, setting up decoys and layered patrols. Every movement had to be exact. A single miscalculation could spell disaster. Hours into the hunt, a torpedo slammed into the water ahead of Convoy Bravo. The wake shimmered ominously in the haze, cutting a path straight for the center of the formation. Mercer barked orders. "Evasive maneuver, starboard 40, deploy countermeasures." The destroyer heeled sharply as depth charges detonated behind them. Ramsey's hands flew across the controls, eyes locked on the blips. The torpedo veered, narrowly missing the convoy. A collective exhale swept through the men on deck, but Mercer didn't allow himself a moment of relief. They were playing a deadly game, and the Germans had all the time in the world. By late afternoon, the wolf pack had been partially neutralized. One U-boat was disabled, forced to surface under concentrated depth charge attacks, while another disappeared into the depths, vanishing from radar. But Mercer knew it wasn't over. The third prowled in silence, learning, observing, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Meanwhile, on the beaches, the human drama of the supply operation continued. Soldiers and engineers pushed trucks through sand and mud, each crate of ammunition and rationed food a lifeline for the men fighting inland. Mercer watched from the Harlow's bridge as a truck got stuck in the dunes. 2 soldiers worked furiously to free it, their faces smeared with sweat and grime. A supply officer ran toward them, waving for reinforcements. Every moment was perilous, every action critical. A flare lit the sky suddenly, red against the grey horizon. Mercer instinctively ducked, the memory of previous torpedo attacks flashing through his mind. It was only a signal from the shore, one of the smaller landing teams reporting progress. But it reminded him how fragile their victory remained. The harbour could hum with activity, convoys could move inland, but a single U-boat, a single miscalculation, could undo weeks of effort. Night fell again, bringing with it a sense of claustrophobic tension. The U-boat prowled beneath the waves, the destroyer Harlow patrolling above. Mercer's mind was a map of pings, blips, and projections. Every decision weighed heavily. Commit to a chase and risk leaving convoys exposed, or maintain patrol and risk the U-boat striking elsewhere. He chose a balance, moving like a chess master, anticipating the enemy's moves while covering the essential arteries of supply. In the dead hours before dawn, the final engagement came. The elusive U-boat attacked Convoy Charlie with surgical precision. Depth charges and evasive maneuvers slowed the attack, but one torpedo struck a lightly armored transport, sending a shockwave across the waves. Mercer gritted his teeth as alarms blared. "Status," he demanded. Damage control reported casualties, but the ship remained afloat. Mercer's heart pounded as he realized how close they had come to catastrophe. "Keep her stable," he ordered. "Protect the remaining convoy. No further losses." Ramsey's hands never stopped moving over the controls. "We can do this. Keep the wolf pack from learning our pattern. Lure them east." Mercer nodded. The operation depended on deception, intelligence, and relentless vigilance. Slowly, carefully, they drew the U-boat into a trap. Depth charges detonated in succession. Sonar blips danced, and the Harlow and its escorts forced the enemy to surface. Under the rising sun, the damaged U-boat revealed itself, the last predator of the night. It surrendered to superior strategy and coordinated effort. By morning, the supply lines had endured another harrowing night. Trucks and tanks continued moving inland. Engineers repaired the pier, soldiers carried supplies forward, and the tide of war in Normandy pressed relentlessly onward. Mercer allowed himself a fleeting sense of triumph, tempered by the knowledge that the fight was far from over. The Germans were adaptive, patient, and unyielding, but so were they. Walking among the men on shore, Mercer witnessed acts of courage and endurance. Soldiers helped each other through mud, medics tended to the wounded, and engineers worked tirelessly to reinforce temporary bridges. Each effort was a testament to human resilience, to the capacity to overcome fear and uncertainty. Mercer returned to the Harlow in the late afternoon. The harbour glittered under the sun, alive with movement. He met Ramsey on the bridge. "We've held them at bay," she said, eyes scanning the horizon. "For now," Mercer exhaled. "For now. But the war doesn't pause. We need to maintain vigilance. Every hour, every convoy, every man counts." They watched in silence as trucks moved inland, tanks rumbled into position, and the fragile web of supply stretched further into occupied territory. The 72-hour operation had succeeded, but the cost of complacency was clear. The Germans were learning, adapting, and waiting for the next opportunity. Mercer knew that, in this war, the margin between victory and disaster was razor-thin. As dusk fell, he stood on the Harlow's deck, eyes on the horizon, the sea calm yet treacherous beneath the surface. The U-boat threat remained a lurking shadow beneath the waves, but hope, resilience, and determination burned brightly in the hearts of those who had endured the nightmare of the previous hours. Every man, every ship, every calculation had contributed to the fragile triumph of the operation. Mercer allowed himself a rare moment to reflect. 5 million tons of supplies had crossed the channel in 72 hours, a feat of coordination, courage, and sheer willpower. Lives had been risked, strategies tested, and human endurance pushed to its limits. Yet, the story of Normandy was still being written, each day a new chapter of struggle, ingenuity, and sacrifice. He lowered his gaze to the convoy below, seeing the trucks carrying fuel and ammunition toward the front lines, the engineers reinforcing bridges, the soldiers moving supplies forward. Each action was a thread woven into the larger tapestry of history, and though the Germans remained a constant threat, their patience and cunning no longer held absolute sway. Mercer knew the operation had set a precedent. The tide of war in Normandy had shifted, if only slightly, in favor of the Allies. But the fight was far from over. The enemy would regroup, adapt, and strike again. And when they did, every lesson learned, every act of courage, and every ounce of preparation would be put to the test. As night settled over the channel, Mercer stood alone on the bow of the Harlow, the wind biting through his uniform. The lights of the harbour glimmered faintly in the distance, the hum of activity, a testament to human determination and resilience. He thought of the engineers on the floating piers, the soldiers carrying crates across sand and mud, the pilots who had swept the skies, and the men and women who had made the impossible possible. Somewhere below the waves, the last U-boat of the wolf pack lurked, silent and calculating, but Mercer felt no fear, only resolve. They had faced the darkness, outwitted the enemy, and ensured that the lifeblood of the invasion continued to flow. The 72-hour operation had demonstrated that ingenuity, courage, and unwavering determination could bend history, even in the face of relentless adversity. And so, as the Harlow patrolled the channel under a sky heavy with stars, Mercer knew that the war would continue, testing them with new threats and impossible challenges. But he also knew that as long as men and women like these stood firm, history could be shaped not by fear or chaos, but by courage, strategy, and the indomitable will to succeed. And the 72-hour operation had ended, but the legacy of their efforts, the lives saved, the supplies delivered, and the enemy held at bay, would echo through Normandy and beyond. And Captain Elias Mercer, standing resolute on the deck of the Harlow, knew that the spirit of those who refused to surrender, even in the face of overwhelming odds, was the true weapon that would carry them through the darkest days of war. The sea was calm now, the horizon stretching endlessly, yet every shadow reminded him that vigilance was eternal. The operation had proven that the impossible was achievable, that meticulous planning, courage, and unity could turn the tide. But the war was far from over. Every sunrise brought new challenges, new threats, and new opportunities to shape the course of history. And Mercer, along with his men, would meet each one with unyielding resolve, ensuring that the story of Normandy continued to be written by those brave enough to defy the odds. Dawn broke over the channel with a soft, golden light that belied the violence of the past 72 hours. Mercer stood on the Harlow's deck, eyes tracing the supply convoys as they moved inland, each truck carrying a lifeline for the men fighting deeper into Normandy. The harbour buzzed with exhausted yet relentless energy. Engineers patched docks, soldiers hoisted crates, and medics tended to the wounded, their faces etched with fatigue but determined resolve. The final U-boat of the Wolfpack, the one that had shadowed them for days, had disappeared into the depths during the night. Mercer didn't celebrate. He had learned the hard way that victory in this war was measured in moments, never absolutes. Yet, for the first time in 3 days, the tension on the bridge lifted slightly, replaced by the quiet pride of accomplishment. Ramsay approached, her boots echoing softly on the metal deck. The men on the pier, they're amazed at what we pulled off. They're calling it the miracle operation, she said, eyes scanning the horizon where the convoys were already dispersing inland. Mercer nodded, letting himself savor the thought. Miracle or not, it was strategy, coordination, and sheer guts. Every man, every crew, every soldier played their part. That's what won this. Below the waves, unseen, the war still lingered. Submarines prowled, the enemy recalculated, and the battle for Normandy was far from over. But for this moment, the lifeblood of the invasion, the 5 million tons of supplies, had reached its destination. Trucks rumbled past, tanks rolled forward, and the soldiers pressed on, each step a testament to human endurance. Mercer's gaze fell on the men and women around him, the engineers adjusting cranes, sailors manning the docks, soldiers moving supplies under the weight of exhaustion. He thought of the pilots who had tested captured B-29 turrets, the men on convoy duty who had faced torpedoes head-on, and the countless others whose courage had remained largely invisible. Their collective resolve had created a ripple of change across the war's theatre, a small but decisive bend in the tides of history. A faint cheer rose from the dock. A convoy had successfully reached a forward position, the soldiers waving to one another. Mercer allowed a rare smile. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a sign that even amidst war's relentless shadow, humanity endured. "Captain," Ramsay said softly, "do you think they'll try again?" Mercer looked toward the horizon, where grey waves met the sky. "Of course, they always do. But we'll be ready. Every hour, every convoy, every life matters. And as long as we hold that line, we tip the balance." The sun climbed higher, reflecting off the water and illuminating the Harlow's steady patrol. The 72-hour operation had ended, but its legacy, supplies delivered, lives saved, and enemy plans foiled, would echo through Normandy. Mercer knew this was only the beginning. Every success would be tested, every strategy challenged. But for now, the operation had proven that courage, ingenuity, and relentless determination could overcome even the most calculating of enemies. He stood on the deck a moment longer, letting the wind whip through his uniform, eyes on the endless horizon. The sea stretched before him, calm, yet brimming with danger. But for the first time in days, hope felt tangible. The men and women of Normandy had held the line, and as long as they did, history itself could be shaped by their courage. The battle continued, but the 72 hours had shown one undeniable truth. Even against overwhelming odds, resolve and ingenuity could bend fate. Mercer turned back to the bridge, the hum of engines and the distant sounds of the harbour a steady reminder that the fight for Normandy and for history itself was far from over. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.